So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Stephen Heller, who will address legal and business solutions to licensing agreement issues caused by coronavirus. Stephen, take it away.
Good morning in the US and early morning on the West Coast, and good afternoon to our licensing international members in Europe and around the globe. For those of us operating in the licensing world, we have twice the level of problems as everybody else right now. With a few exceptions for Purell or toilet paper, virtually every consumer products business is looking at lower sales, canceled orders, production and supply chain disruptions, and collection and cash flow issues. But licensing adds an additional level of licensing agreement contractual issues that non-licensing businesses don't have to face. So if you're a licensor or a licensee or an agent or a retailer with licensed products, everything we planned for 2020 is now different. Take your budgets, your forecasts, your marketing plans, your product launches, and toss them out the window. We need to face this reality for our business, but more importantly, we need to appreciate that so are our counterparts. This is a global event and our entire industry is affected. And we're all just trying to hold on. We're trying to hold on to our health, our families, hold on to our peace of mind and our jobs and our businesses. This pandemic is costing lives, it is costing jobs, and it has drastically changed our business environment. But when circumstances are at their worst, our human spirit is at its best. We saw it in the 1980s with hunger, we saw it after 9/11, and we're seeing it now. So let me start with these words of encouragement from a few of my heroes. Every little thing is going to be all right. When the world is running down, you make the best of what's still around. Everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. And maybe most appropriately for today's webinar, if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. So let's talk about getting what we need. Today, we're going to discuss license agreement issues and concerns, and I'm going to offer a few ideas and specific strategies to solve these problems and come up with winning business solutions. But more than that, if you take one thing away from today's webinar, I hope everyone leaves here with hope, confidence, and carries away that spirit of cooperation. Know that what you're going through, so is the other person. And we need to work in the spirit of true partnership. We always hear those words, licensing is like a partnership. Well, now is the time to show that. And I can't think of a better example than one very large apparel client that's both a brand owner and a licensor, and they're a licensee of several brands. And we were discussing his business in general, mass cancellations and cash flow issues. And we asked him about relief and workouts in licensing. And he said, I would love to get relief from all my licensors and not have to give relief to my licensees. But that's not the reality. And he and his CFO has now asked us, and we're working on developing an action plan to cover all of the outbound licensees for that client. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Stephen Heller. I'm an attorney with 25 years in trademarks and licensing. I represent both brands on the licensor side and manufacturers on the licensee side. I worked with large international brands to new, smaller brands and new startup companies. I'm also a business law professor at the graduate and undergraduate level, and I currently teach a negotiation of licensing agreement workshops at Nova Southeastern University Law School. I'm also the founder of the Brand Liaison, and we represent licensors and licensees in fashion, character, entertainment, celebrities, sports, and art brands. And I say this so that you'll understand I'm coming to this from both sides. I don't have any bias. I'm not pro-licensor or pro-licensee, and I don't have any hidden agenda with this webinar. In fact, I think you all know we don't get paid for this. I volunteered for this as my way of trying to help everybody, offering my ideas of some fair win-win solutions, and in that spirit of true partnership. So real quick, I don't need to tell anybody on this call about the problems we're all facing. It started with supply chain disruptions from China, led to retail store closures, whether they're temporary, permanent, or some retailers with questionable viability. Some of them are suspending their payments. They delayed deliveries or completely canceled orders. We have missed seasons, missed product launches, missed movie releases, canceled sports and social events, and coming out of this, reduced disposable income, conservative spending, and so many more problems. In light of these problems, how do we address the licensing contractual issues? Well, it starts with a review of your licensing contract. Licensees, take out your agreements. First, review all of the key business terms. Look at the financial terms, the payment commitments, and very important, the dates. In fact, you may want to do a chart of what your payment commitments and due dates are, and then look through for any other performance requirements. If there's marketing, if there are product launch dates, if there are marketing plan submissions, understand all of your key business obligations. And then take a look at the key legal sections of the agreements. Take a look at the provisions. What is a breach? How do people terminate the agreements and what the cure periods are? Also take a look at the remedies and the sell-off period, which could become very important. But there are two specific provisions that I want to point out. One is what I refer to as a cross-termination provision. Licensees that have multiple agreements with one licensor, many of those agreements say if you're in breach in one agreement, you're in breach in all of the agreements. Very important to know about if you have those cross-termination provisions. And then, of course, the force majeure clause. I must have gotten 25 calls on force majeure in the past week. What is a force majeure clause? Technically, force majeure is a Latin term. It means superior force, and it's used to describe events beyond the control of the parties. It was designed to cover things like floods, wars, or strikes when performance under agreement is basically impossible. A force majeure clause in a contract is a contractual provision that suspends a party's performance for some temporary limited period of time under certain specific conditions. What does a force majeure clause do? But it's very important to know what it doesn't do. What it does is suspends performance temporarily. It doesn't release performance. It doesn't allow licensees to terminate an agreement because it's more difficult. But you have to look at the specific wording of the agreements because they're narrowly construed. And I'm going to put up here just a sample random force majeure clause that I pulled out of some agreements. I highlighted some of the words where it says if performance under the agreement by a party is prevented, delayed, or made impractical because of an act of God, terrorism, fire, flood. By the way, pandemic is in many force majeure clause, but was not in this standard template clause. But it did talk about an act of government, which the government shutdown would probably be deemed part of this definition. And then it goes on to say, shall be excused from such performance to the event it's prevented, hindered, or delayed. Another clause said the obligations under the agreement are suspended while the force majeure event continues. So if, for example, the economies and cities are reopened in April or May or June, the temporary suspension ends. And then also look for this wording, because some force majeure events have a provision where the non-affected party is able to terminate the agreement. In theory, that would allow licensors to terminate agreements if licensees aren't performing. But it's important to understand that a force majeure clause just temporarily suspends performance when it's impossible. In theory, paying royalties during this time is not impossible. The payment of the royalties may not be suspended. And what happens in agreements where there is no force majeure clause? Well, the courts don't imply one, but there are other legal defenses of impracticability, impossibility, and frustration of purpose. So it's important to know the legalese and know the lay of the land. But let me say this right now. If you're going down the legal road, you're going in the wrong direction. It's long, it's expensive, it is very unpredictable, and I predict in the next 4 or 5 years, there's going to be a lot of confusing case law on force majeure. But my goal today is to prevent that. Let's stay out of the courtroom. One of my goals today is to help both licensors and licensees find amicable business solutions and a business agreement to move forward in a positive, cooperative partnership. The energy is so much better spent in a positive direction than adversarial litigation. Licensees, you want to stay out of the courtroom because it's long and expensive. It's a complete distraction of your business. And at the end of the day, you could be liable for a significant amount of money, including paying both sides attorney's fees. But equally, licensors want to stay out of the courtroom. It's a distraction. It's harmful to long-term relationships. There are uncertain results. And this is important. Licensors know if they squeeze too hard, they could be in litigation. If they get a huge judgment and put the licensee out of business, the licensor ends up getting nothing. So it's important that we look at alternative solutions. And by the way, one of these solutions that we'll talk about, and it's going to be last, of course, one of those solutions could just be a mutual termination, maybe for a reduced sum or for no money. But licensors are incentivized here to come to a mutual agreement as well. Because like I said, if a licensor squeezes too hard, they could end up getting nothing. So our goal is to stay out of the courtroom. How do we stay out of the courtroom? What do we do first? Communication and action. Where do we begin? Communicate. Reach out. Licensees, reach out ASAP. Even if it's just to touch base. Reach out to the people you're dealing with on the other side, even if it's on a personal basis. Hey, how are you? How are you making out? Licensors, I'm going to encourage all the licensors to adopt a plan. And if you're considering a plan currently, send a memo. Hey, we're working on a plan. Now, there may or may not be a one size. Also licensors, sorry. Reach out to your licensees and invite discussion, because every licensee could be operating under a little bit different scenario, a little bit different comfort level, some light at the end of the tunnel for some, even more gloomy projections for others. Reach out to your licensees and invite discussion. Now, I don't know if this is going to be a consistent overall plan and it covers everybody, or I was hearing a lot at the beginning of this, we're going to look at this on a case-by-case basis. A lot of licensors were saying, we're going to look at this on a case-by-case basis. I think we're past that. I think it's clear now that this is affecting everybody. And if a licensor has 25 or 50 or hundreds of licensees, a case-by-case basis could become unmanageable. So I'm going to offer a solution. My proposed suggestion, licensors take an affirmative step and adopt a corona relief plan, or at a minimum, corona relief guidelines, some sort of consistent amendment policies. It can be global, company-wide. It can apply to all your licensees, or maybe tiers or just certain groups of licensees, or at least provide some sort of guidelines. But it's important when you're adopting this plan to also plan for exceptions. There are probably categories that are performing, like food, hygiene, puzzles, e-commerce. Performing categories might not need relief. Underperforming or struggling licensees may need to be treated differently. And always consider those special circumstances. Step one, communication, reach out, and action. Now, let's talk about the key business issues, the terms GMR and GMS. I'm sure you know these terms: guaranteed minimum royalties, guaranteed minimum sales, MGR, GMR, GMS. Let's start with the hardest issue first. There are two immediate and very hard issues: the Q1 royalty payments that are now due during the month of April. And the reason this is such a hard issue is because Q1 was basically intact. Q1 was basically business as usual until maybe the last 2 weeks of March, maybe some signs of supply chain disruptions. But there are two specific issues we need to look at for Q1. Royalties on your actual sales, royalties on licensees' actual sales, and royalties on the GMR. How do we deal with the royalties due on the actual sales from January, February, and March in light of what we know now? Couple of concerns. One, are licensees even in a position to generate proper reporting? And this is very important, licensees. Most of your agreements provide the royalties are due on shipping. Look at the difficulty if a licensee has shipped the goods, royalties are now due, but the licensee has not been paid. That's a very difficult situation to face. And then, of course, the guaranteed minimum royalties, the GMR payments that were due at the end of Q1, because this may be a company that sells more product later in the year. So again, potential solutions, just some of my ideas, how to resolve these difficult issues. Well, on the actual royalties, licensees, if you've collected the money, you got paid from your bank or from your customer or from your bank or factor, well, then you really need to remit those royalties to your licensor. That's just fair. You've collected the money. That's a payment that needs to be made. But if a licensee hasn't received payment, licensors, you could consider deferring that until collection. Maybe make it due within 7 days after collection. But if the licensee's already shipped the goods and hasn't received payment, it makes it in a very difficult situation to actually have to pay the royalties on that during these circumstances. On the GMRs, I'm going to suggest, and we're going to talk about a lot of solutions during today's webinar. I'm going to suggest for the GMRs, maybe roll this into the bigger picture, roll this into a broader solution. But if the licensor is being difficult, licensors are under stress as well. Licensees, this is one you might have to concede and pay, push for other concessions later, maybe some non-monetary concessions that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But this is one, because Q1 was basically intact, I'm going to encourage licensees, this money is owed and due, and you don't want to be negotiating from a position of weakness. So the hardest issue being the Q1 payments. How do we deal with the Q2 royalty payments? And when I talk about the Q2 payments, I'm talking about it in terms of, let's also look at this in light of 2020, or sometimes I use the word current license year, because I acknowledge not every license is on a January 1st to December 31st. Some people are on a July 1 to June 30th, or some other license year. So throughout today's webinar, when I talk about 2020, know that if you have a different license year, I'm talking about your current license year that's going to affect Q2 and potentially Q3. And we're going to talk about these in terms of GMR and GMS. How do we deal with the Q2 royalty payments? I'm going to offer 3 potential solutions. The first one, really easy. Just defer Q2 GMR. It's easy and it buys time, but it's not the greatest solution because it doesn't take into account the realities of the current world. It doesn't take into account that there's going to be a significant portion of Q2 that is much different than we predicted at the time we signed the license agreement. So another solution to reduce by a certain percentage or waive the Q2 GMR completely. This buys time, gives some relief and concessions, Licensors have to reduce their expectations. But how do you address yearly totals in GMR and GMS? Is the 25% reduction accurate? Q2 is generally the lowest quarter of the year. And by the way, this solution might not even be applicable if a licensee has prepaid, or it's an annual guarantee that was paid in January, or even a term guarantee. But I'm giving you food for thought and suggestions of how to work with these. Now, another solution, reduce all of 2020 or waive 2020 GMR and GMS completely. What this does is this leaves all of the deal terms, the term of the agreement, how long it lasts, the same, except for the monetary performance terms of guaranteed minimum royalties and guaranteed minimum sales. What this does is this sets 2020 to actual performance. It takes the realities of the current world into consideration. We hope for the best. We help our licensees get back on their feet. And we're going to pick up in 2021, leaving all of 2021 and all the future years in place. Now, each of these three solutions leave the dates and non-monetary deal terms as they are. And all we're looking at changing here are the monetary commitments and the payments. Now, I acknowledge for licensors, this puts a major dent on your revenue expectations. So I'm going to propose another potential solution in the context of all of 2020 that I personally like a lot better for both sides. Now that we've looked at Q1 and Q2, how do we look at all of 2020 license year for guaranteed minimum royalties and guaranteed minimum sales? And again, when I say 2020, think of the current license year if you're not on a calendar year. This potential solution is a win-win for all parties. I call it a license year extended, or 2020 and a half. And what I'm proposing is to make the current license year an 18-month licensing year. Make the current license year an 18-month licensing year. Leave all the numbers the same as the contract requires. Leave the total dollars set forth in the agreement the same, and simply spread out all the payments over 6 quarters over 18 months. That's why I call it 2020 and a half, or a Heller extension. I'm a branding guy. I called it a Heller extension. I personally love this solution, both licensors and licensees, because it acknowledges Q2 and maybe all of 2020 will be affected, but still keeps the financial commitments and takes both ways. Now, I know it adds complexities, especially from an annual accounting perspective. I know it's going to push out the future license years that can stay on a 12-month or maybe make another 18-month year. But I love this solution because it acknowledges that all of 2020 will be disrupted. It adds extra time for licensees to recoup, but still holds all the parties to the original agreement and provides for the total payments and total expectations of the licensor. And we're already doing this. We're already negotiating an amendment on behalf of one client currently. So notice in the last slide, we held the dates and the term the same and changed the dollars. Here we hold the dollars the same and change the term. And there's one other variation of this, combining 2020 and 2021, or cross-collateralizing is a term we use in the industries, allowing the GMRs and the GMS from one year to apply to another year. That's similar to the above, but now it leaves all the payment dates and the amounts the same, but simply allows the licensee to recoup with a stronger performance in 2021.
Stephen, it's Marty. Somebody sent in a question. Do you amend via a contract? Do you amend via a contract amendment, How do you handle this in a contractual basis?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would definitely suggest doing an amendment, a revised schedule, get it in writing. There should be no confusion on this. This will be very easy to put in a new chart. In fact, if you're scheduling, I'm just going to make up an easy number for easy math, $100,000 GMR payment that was 4 payments of 25. Now you're going to make it 6 payments of X. So you want to schedule that out. I would put all of that in a written amendment, because it's also going to move license year 2 dates, license year 3 dates, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you, Marty.
Okay, thanks.
And again, all of these suggestions, you may want to do combination of these. These are just my ideas to get licensors and licensees thinking about problem solving and the spirit of partnership. So we talked about amounts, we talked about dates, but there are other areas where we can get even more creative. We can also look at non-financial considerations and some out-of-the-box ideas. And what I'm going to go through on this slide, I think it's really important that licensees take a self-assessment, see which of these apply to you, and then you need to reach out to your licensor and advise. So what are some non-financial considerations, easy concessions by licensors where they're giving up non-financial things in order to recoup the maximum dollars? Well, first off, expand your channels of distribution. Look at off-price, home shopping, club, or other channels, especially e-commerce. Whether it's Amazon and a brand owner site, whether it's licensees, e-commerce site, and in fact, on our Brand Liaison website, in the industry resources section, there's a company called Digital Retail Advisors from Jeff Berman, a former Amazon guy, that he can work with you on an Amazon e-commerce strategy. Reach out to me, I'm happy to connect you. So we can look at expanding channels of distribution, waiving off-price caps. Many contracts have limitations of how much or what percentage, 25, 35, 50%, that can be sold in off-price channels. Maybe waive the off-price caps for 2020 or even the full contract year. Remove caps on discounts and allowances. Licensees, if you look at your agreement, many agreements have a cap on how much off of suggested wholesale you can give to a customer as a discount on caps and allowances. Now is not the time to enforce this, especially on seasonal or timely merchandise. For a licensor, this is an easy non-monetary concession. And one of my favorite, yeah.
It's funny because just as you put that last line of type on there about seasonal or timely merchandise, somebody sent in a question, do you have a solution if your business is seasonal where the 18-month extension doesn't work because the bulk of your sales occur in Q4?
Well, if the bulk of your sales are coming in Q4, you might not be suffering some of the same problems. I'm worried about people who have, Mother's Day jewelry or flowers in May, or people who are selling swimwear, and we don't know when that'll get caught up this summer.
Whatever the season is, yeah.
Yeah. So if the 18-month year doesn't work, maybe in your special circumstance I talked about, maybe your license year extended needs to be a 2-year license year and push 21 out to 22, 22 to 23, and give you a 2-year window, or use some other variation of reducing the amounts, bouncing your GMRs into the next year. It's a great question. Please reach out to me after the webinar. We can talk about that specific circumstance and come up with something creative.
Okay, great, thanks.
Another non-financial consideration, and this is actually my favorite one on this slide, maybe expand the territory. If your license is only USA, does the licensee have the ability to sell to Canada or Mexico or South America? Expanding the territory, let me acknowledge, There's additional contractual issues. We have to make sure there's no other licensee in that territory. And by the way, I'm talking about North America and South America. I know we have our friends in Europe on the line. Can we expand a European licensee to the Middle East or to Russia? Can we expand an Asian licensee to Japan or Australia? Expanding the territory, we have to make sure there's no other conflicting license. And we have to look at legal considerations like trademarks. But this is really important. There may be an opportunity here for licensors to obtain greater international trademark coverage based on the licensee's use in commerce. But again, these are specific issues, but there may be an opportunity to gain international trademark rights by allowing a licensee to sell internationally. Another obvious one here, expanding the product offerings. Maybe a licensee only has a certain category, but they make other products that weren't included. If a licensor wants to continue to maximize the value of that relationship, continue to make the revenue that it expected, and help the licensee in a difficult time, as long as there is no conflict, this may be the time to expand the license to give additional product offerings. But again, licensees, you have to take a self-assessment. See which of these things apply to your situation, and you have to reach out. Licensors, if you're giving financial relief, maybe you want some concessions from your licensees. Licensees may want to reconsider exclusivity in light of changing the performance or the GMR. Or maybe a licensee wants to give back categories, only focus on the core things. And in order to get that reduction of the monetary commitments, you need to give back certain categories. And then I'm going to encourage the licensors and licensees team up for a distribution strategy. Look for certain partner retailers or e-commerce, coordinate that sales strategy, maybe coordinate the licensor's website, and come up with, I don't even want to use the word liquidation strategy, come up with an approved Corona acceleration strategy that maybe all of the licensees can participate. So there's a bunch of non-financial considerations, part of that give and take in the true spirit of partnership. And the last solution I'm going to offer today, if none of those applies and all else fails, when there's no other viable option, maybe the best option is to consider a mutual termination. That keeps us out of the courtroom, maintains relationships. Licensors, consider a mutual termination if the licensee was underperforming before this corona, if the licensee is unable to survive and they're facing potentially going out of business anyway, if there are other agreements with the licensee that are successful, maybe remove the unsuccessful ones, or if you're working on potential other programs for the future, now is the time to exercise that goodwill. When no other option seems viable, we need to consider mutual termination. Licensees, you want to consider this option if there are release dates missed around a film or opportunities that are completely lost because of the timing. Licensees want to consider this if the key retailer that was required is cutting back or going out of business. And I'm not talking about the department stores or obviously the big guys. We're talking about many of these specialty stores and even some of the e-commerce box companies, subscription. Number three, licensee, if you need to significantly contract your business, you've cut down on the number of employees, you need to contract your world. Now is the time to let go of some of the licenses and some of the more ambitious growth plans when no other option seems viable, and mutual termination could be the best option. Again, my solution box. If you're going to consider mutual termination, think about, is there a payment from the licensee to the licensor? A reduced fee based on a percentage of the remaining GMRs? Or maybe consider no payment at all. Consider inventory positions and sell-off periods. Maybe we terminate the license effective year end because there's inventory that a licensee can continue to sell. but let's look at inventory positions, work in process, transferring molds. If there are toys and molds or other assets, there's value there. And also transfer of existing business opportunities. Perhaps a licensee has to concede that they can't fulfill some of the existing opportunities, and maybe a licensor can coordinate moving those opportunities to another party. All creative business solutions to think about in the terms of the new Corona world.
Stephen,
Yes.
a question came in as you were on that last slide. If you could take it back one slide.
Of course.
Somebody asked, beyond licensee obligations, what about what licensors owe licensees? A pushback movie might not have the same value it once had. What about inventory now made irrelevant?
You know, when they're pushed back, and again, difficult times call for creative solutions. When they're pushed back and maybe retailers are cutting back, especially if you have the inventory that's already built up. But if a movie has pushed back, by the way, this leads into a true exercise of a force majeure clause, because let's just say you had the NFL or the NBA playoff license, and now there are no NBA playoffs. But there was a big program that you had with the NBA championship or the NHL championship. That's a true force majeure event and now makes performance impossible or impractical. When movie dates are pushed back, we're going to need workarounds and we're going to need solutions. And just extending dates may not be the only answer. And especially if that inventory was made and brought in for a movie release in April or May, the parties have to work together, reduce royalty percentages maybe. There are creative solutions, and I'd be happy if that person wants to reach out to me to come up with some creative suggestions on how to memorialize an amendment. Thanks, Mark.
Right. How much of this is all complicated by the fact that it's very uneven across the U.S., but also across the world? I mean, you have certain markets that are very hit, certain markets that are less hit, certain markets where commerce has been interrupted, others where it's much less so. How much does that complicate all of this within this contractual world?
And that's where in the earlier slide I said we need to consider special circumstances. We can come up with policies and procedures, but there are exceptions. We represent a women's fashion brand that's primarily an e-commerce brand of sweatpants and loungewear. And their business over the last 3 weeks actually picked up because people are sitting around the house wearing sweatpants and loungewear. Obviously, their retail stores are closed, but their e-commerce business actually picked up. You need to take these on a case-by-case basis. Different territories, different industries, different parties are in different positions. So while I did encourage a consistent plan, I noticed we have to make exceptions for more difficult circumstances, both positive on the negative side and the more positive circumstances on the positive side. So let's just run through. We're going to open it up to a broad Q&A in a minute. So send your questions in to Marty now. But
I got some.
Okay. I just want to summarize that things will be different. Licensors, licensees, retailers, and suppliers all need to work together to find real business solutions. I'm going to encourage you guys to reach out and communicate. Licensees, licensors, your agents can help coordinate and provide tools. Take advantage of the industry resources. One of the best things about our industry is the sharing of information. Just look at what Maura, Sharon, Marty, Mark, and the whole team at Licensing International do, and what we all do with each other. We support each other. So I encourage anyone struggling, reach out to me and look at the industry resources section on my brand liaison website or on the Licensing International website. I have resources for air freight, very affordable freight forwarders, warehousing, pick and pack, graphic design, the Amazon e-commerce company I told you about, and a sales group that focuses on Costco, Sam's, Walmart, and Target. Reach out to me. I'm happy to connect you. Licensees, it also may be a time to pivot. Look at your business model, assess your strengths and weaknesses. Struggling manufacturers may need to look for new opportunities. Brands may look to open up new channels of distribution where they previously didn't want to go. And look at new business models. We're actually working with a multi-billion-dollar international company that provides financing, sourcing, and fulfillment. If you're in a need of capital or want to outsource some of those functions, again, just reach out to me. And in the end, we'll get by with a little help from our friends. So let's open this up to questions. By the way, I also created a checklist based on today's webinar. And I know Licensing International is going to make the video and the slideshow, or at least the slideshow, available. But if you email me, I'll send you a copy of the checklist that reviews most of today's webinar. But let's, we got another 20 minutes or so. Let's do some lightning rounds.
Okay, there are a few questions that have already come in, and I'll attack them in order. What are the odds a big player such as a studio, major toy company, whatever, will concede to a licensee's request for financial or non-financial considerations?
Listen, I think there's a good possibility. I read this week that Hershey's did one of those solutions and eliminated guaranteed minimum royalties for all of their non-food licensees for 2020. I think there's a very good chance that major studios have to acknowledge these changes. And again, they're faced with a situation, if they squeeze too hard, they're going to end up with nothing. So I'm encouraging the communication, and I'm encouraging licensors, big and small, to work with your companies. This is a small industry. These things are going to come back around. So preserve relationships. But I think there's a good chance.
And I can say I've spoken to a couple of people from large entertainment companies, and basically they're starting out with the case-by-case perspective. We know we can't, it's not business as usual. So I think there's a willingness to at least listen. You know, how the deal comes together is a whole nother matter. Question.
To answer that question, one of those solutions, you know, may be to release you from the agreement, and maybe you pay a much smaller amount. But even that option may be a better option than going out of business or struggling with a license that isn't working anymore for one of those reasons. Go ahead, Marty.
Okay. Another question. Some of my licensees are claiming that Amazon stopped ordering their products since they are considered non-essential goods. Have you heard of this? Overall, one would think that e-commerce is booming right now, virtually for most categories. Is this true? What's your perspective here? And this person apologizes. Sorry if this question deviates a bit from the legal side to the business side, but Heller just mentioned an e-commerce fashion brand, ... So go ahead.
It's actually a great question.
And by the way, I don't think that legal is separate from the business issues. So
not in this, and that's why the title of this was mixed. But it's a great question, and it comes down to, I know just a little bit to be dangerous, and if I could have somebody, if I could phone a friend, I would call Jeff Berman, who is the Amazon guy I told you about. But it has to do with the fulfilled by Amazon, and when the vendor on Amazon is fulfilling themselves, and merch by Amazon. I know that's the distinction. So Amazon may not be taking your goods in, but there still may be opportunities if you're doing your own fulfillment or use a 3PL for fulfillment, that you can still be selling merchandise on Amazon. And maybe that's a great topic for a next seminar, Marty.
I've already written it down.
Great. Next question.
Okay, next question. Hold on one second, sorry. In previous years, we've seen bankruptcies, i.e. Toys R Us, where retailers did not pay licensees on shipments, but brand owners, licensors still required licensees to pay royalties. Do you have a feel that given the fact that COVID affects all, brand owners will be more amenable in this time?
So that's a situation where the goods were shipped. By the way, this is one of the issues that I tried to negotiate for a fair solution. My personal opinion, if the licensee's not getting paid, it's very hard to pay a royalty on it. But I definitely sympathize with that Toys R Us or any other bankruptcy situation. Um, in this case, with the exception of some Q1 shipping, we shouldn't have a lot of the situation where goods are shipped and then vendors not getting paid. So this isn't going to be as rampant as the Toys R Us situation. But if I look at this from a fairness perspective, not the legalese of the agreement, from a fairness perspective, I think this is also one that a licensor that values the relationship can concede on if a licensee has not been paid, not to force royalties on that. The counter to that is you're the one taking the credit risk and you have opportunities for factoring and other solutions that they don't have to protect against that. But I don't think that's going to be as prevalent of an issue in coronavirus, as it was with bankruptcies, unless some of these companies go under and there are a lot of shipping, unfactored shipping out there.
Okay, next question. Some licensees have asked for reduced royalty rates in addition to waiving MGR. Is there a good reason to reduce royalty rates?
You know, if you're changing channels of distribution or margins are tight, this is always a give and take. I didn't have reduced royalty rates as one of my suggestions, and I haven't seen it in any of my personal discussions over the last couple of weeks. But if that's what it's going to take to keep everybody out of court, to have licensors still recognizing revenue and have licensees still able to function and have a little bit more capital cash flow to get back on their feet, then that's a good solution.
Okay. If terminating, how about a licensor receiving of sell-off stock in lieu of royalty payment? Any issues to consider, say, for warehousing stock?
You know, and that's why I put on that slide. Consider your inventory positions, consider moving opportunities. We actually had that. We had another client a few years back that had a very thriving e-commerce business to the tune of maybe about $20 million in e-commerce business on their own website. And there were a couple of licensees that were underperforming at retail. And what we did is we had the licensor take merchandise valued, I think it might have even been valued at cost, but at least at wholesale, take merchandise valued at wholesale, sell it on their site at retail. So they not only got paid the GMR in product, but then they made that margin, and that was a win-win workout solution. So that's a very good solution if the licensor has an e-commerce site.
Okay. Do you have a degree in psychology? Okay,
No.
because the next question is how best to talk to senior management about sales forecast reduction.
I don't need a degree in psychology to tell you honesty, integrity, and transparency. That's the best way.
Okay. What can we do to help the community if we have excess samples of t-shirts or pajamas? Is there a good organization we can send to so they can be turned into masks or other needed supplies?
I'm going to encourage, of the 200 or 300 people on the line, if somebody else has an answer to that question, please email Marty. But that's brilliant, and thank you so much for what you are offering.
Mark, that was great, and we'll see what we can find out. Licensors and licensees need to address the current and post-COVID-19 changes in retail buying behavior. Consumers are, and in the foreseeable future, will be reluctant to buy toys, apparel, and other products in retail stores that have been subject to multiple touches. Licensees should consider this paradigm shift to minimize the number of touches in the supply chain, utilizing higher levels of drop shipping for retail partners and an overall shift. I'm getting into this. I'm looking for the question. Okay.
But yes, all good points so far.
Should this be incorporated into the COVID-19 plan? Should licensors consider creating a brand-owned seller account to allow licensees to sell off excess merchandise, but have a higher sense of control and limit the exposure to one core seller and minimize the detrimental effects on the brand?
This is an expert in their field with that question, but
You bet.
absolutely yes. This is what I was talking about a few slides ago when I talked about an Amazon or a specific licensor website and that licensor Corona strategy. Now is the time with these paradigm shifts, and I talked about pivoting. Listen, I had the conversation with Sharon just the other day. We've been talking about a shift in retail from brick and mortar to e-commerce for a long time. But now maybe forcing our hand, maybe this is just a little bit of an accelerator. But now is surely the time licensors should be considering a licensor controlled website, brand pages on Amazon, and then finding the way to, pull demand and push product through. But whether it's for toys and again, we work with Jazzwares and they have the first act musical instruments, puzzles. There are categories right now that are performing in e-commerce because of the fact that people are at home. And going forward, the anticipation of what are the changes in consumer behavior, both in their conduct and their purchasing patterns. This is, while you have the time to focus on your business, this is what I was talking about in the last slide on pivot, shift in business modeling and new considerations post Corona.
Okay. This builds on an earlier question. What about seasonal inventories that have been produced and can't be sold and can't be shipped?
Very difficult. So 2 questions in there. One is, what do you do with that merchandise and how do you deal with that problem? Second problem is, how do you deal with the royalties and the GMRs and the other commitments that were tied to it? And that was why in my opening statement, I said anybody involved in licensing has an additional layer of problems that a non-licensed business doesn't have, because that swimwear vendor, if it's non-licensed, if it's a company-owned brand, they have the same problem. They just don't add the problem of, do I also have to pay royalties and GMR? So there's an additional level of complications when it's a licensed product. But listen, you have off-price channels, you have e-commerce channels, you maybe have to hold those goods to next year. If your license ended or you had commitments in 1 year, this is where the parties need to work together to come up with amicable solutions. But it's not an easy issue.
Yeah. What about supply chain disruptions based on manufacturing in China?
I'm not sure what the question is.
I'm not really sure.
Well, let me guess, and if I'm wrong, they could send another question. But when you have GMRs and commitments and now you're not able to get your goods in, that might fit a definition of force majeure. I can't get the goods to fulfill these. From what I'm seeing now, much of the supply chain disruptions are starting to be resolved. Again, I mentioned air freight on my website is a great air freight. So there may be other solutions to salvage some opportunities there, but supply chain disruptions is has been very real, and that was even before we had the mass shutdowns we had in the US.
Right. Here's a comment. Amazon has started buying from vendors and sellers, but on a selective basis. We are seeing purchase orders being placed over the past week.
Repeat
that was just a comment. What was that?
Repeat that.
It says Amazon has started buying from vendors and sellers, but on a selective basis. We are seeing purchase orders being placed over the past week. So that was more of a comment than a question.
I think it was answering the prior person who said, well, what about that Amazon stopped? And
right.
At least that person is starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay. Hold on 1 second. Okay. Jeff Berman has asked if we can unmute him. He can answer the question. He can answer the question about Amazon's supply chain issue. If you can do it in a short bit, Steve, can you unmute him now?
Oh, Steve Sparaccio or me?
Yes, no, not Steven.
Good, because I would have.
Jeff, can we get you? Hello?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, quick answer to that. There are two methods. If you're a seller on Amazon, you can do something called fulfilled by merchant, which is drop shipping your orders out of your own warehouse. It's very simple to set up when you manage your inventory in your Seller Central portal. If you're a vendor, you can set up direct fulfillment where you have to get a separate vendor code, and Amazon will send you the orders under a normal 850 EDI, and you will ship under an Amazon account number. A lot of companies are doing that right now because it not only provides an ability right now to ship through Amazon, but it's a safety net in the future when Amazon's out of stock as a vendor. You'll always have the safety net to fulfill directly. 2
Great.
seconds or less, Marty. How's that?
Excellent, perfect.
All right.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right,
I
great.
love the
Thank you.
phone a friend option.
Yeah, right. Okay, another question, and this is actually something that came up in a conversation I was having yesterday. And thank you, Jeff. On the subject of pushed films, does a licensee have any right to ask a licensor to help pay for storage fees for holding goods for what is now looking like 1 year on some of the film moves?
Yeah, and again, you absolutely have the right to ask, and that was the first slide. If you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. Surely this is a need and an unanticipated cost. And if they're not going to pay directly with cash on cash, maybe that's where they give some concessions, reduce money, additional advertising and promotion, some other product placement opportunity. I would definitely ask, and I would look for creative solutions, even if it's a reduction against your royalty. When you ultimately have to pay them, you can reimburse yourself. That's a very viable solution there if they're not handing you a check for a year of warehousing.
Okay. Here's another question. Somebody from London. For companies that are trying to protect their IP within an IP holding company, away from the operating company, what's your advice on how to best set the royalties back to your firm and to potential licensors / clients? Now we're getting deep into the legal weeds.
Listen, I know the structure super well, and I credit a brilliant attorney, Amnon Shabolit, that I worked for many years, for creating a structure that used the international holding company to protect the IP. I'm just not sure I understand the question, but we're working right now with a great organization that builds e-commerce sites and print on demand. If we need the use in commerce requirements, and by the way, anybody building a brand can reach out to me on this. The use in commerce requirements, a website and print on demand fulfillment with that brand name will satisfy that. But if you're putting the assets in an IP holding company, it's important that you have the right licenses that are doing business in the territories in order to perfect the trademarks that require actual use in commerce. I think that was the question. But reach out to me. Reach out to me on that question. I love the structure, and I'm very familiar with it.
Two last things before we wrap up. A couple of people have sent in on the idea of where to donate things. Delivering Good is a great organization that we at Licensing International have worked with in terms of donating goods for use in a lot of different communities. So you might want to look at Delivering Good. And then somebody said, not a priority question, but before you close, can you recap honesty, transparency, and what was the last word? I would like to quote Stephen when I present. So
that's probably for Mark Seavey, but I said honesty, integrity, and transparency.
Okay.
But thank you. Yeah, that's the best way. Open and honest communication. And then my last final note: make sure you get these in writing, because Corona, we're not allowed to shake hands, so you can't do it on a handshake.
Okay, great. Stephen, thank you very much. We weren't able to get to all the questions, but I know I've noticed a lot of people have to leave. Thank you really a lot for a lot of very thought-provoking, useful things to think about. Everybody, thank you for being on the webinar. Again, please fill out the SurveyMonkey survey we send you. let us know how we're doing, and please suggest other topics. So everybody, thank you very, very much. Stephen, thank you for a great session. And we'll see you all. Next webinar is April 22nd. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.